Hi, this is Ethan. Again, this is the second part of my ongoing series on the relationship between data and you, or data and me, or data and anybody. And today I wanted to discuss the granularity of data and why that is kind of, um, I think, the key to democratizing both data access and kind of having sovereignty over our own data. Think about this for a second, if you would. And this is probably an idea you've had when you've used the internet, but how many times have you looked for a rating for a place and you see the stars and you're like, everything's either 5-star or 1-star, maybe 2 stars, maybe 4 stars, rarely 3 stars. And one of the big issues with this is, well, first of all, like, how do you know, like, the person reviewing is a legit person or a bot or some paid actor of some kind? And the other problem, of course, is that, why was that particular rating given? uh, I, for example, myself, when I'm on Google Maps, I don't use Google Maps anytime that I can avoid it. But when I do use it, I use it for 2 reasons, and only 2 reasons. One is I really don't like the place and I want to see them go out of business. Or 2, I really love the place and I want to try to help them stay in business. And results that it's usually a 5-star, 4-star review, or 1 or 2-star, depending on how poorly my experience was. And I tend to try to skew heavily towards promoting stuff, and if I don't like a place, oftentimes I'll just not say anything. But it's a big difficulty because there's lots of times when, for example, a restaurant. You go to a restaurant, and any particular customer of a restaurant is going to have a kind of different pretext for why they're going there. Maybe they've got they're craving one particular thing, or they're having some particular kind of a day, or there's all sorts of different variables that can be going on. And that 3-star, 5-star, 1-star review is basically the culmination, the aggregation of everything about that person at that moment in time, their motives, their biological state, the whatever chemicals or hormones from whatever substances they might be consuming, whatever food they've eaten or haven't eaten, excuse me. And so it's just really hard to get viable information out of that stuff because, I'll put it this way. Well, I went to a restaurant one time and it had horrible reviews. Like, the reviews were probably the worst I've ever been for a restaurant I went to. And I went there, I believe it was some ethnically related thing, and that's kind of why I went there, because I kind of wanted that experience. And so I was just going to ignore the reviews and go and experience whatever. I can't even remember the food or the restaurant it was, but I just remember that it had this horrible rating. This rating that you'd think they were like your average Subway or McDonald's level kind of stuff or worse. And I go there, and it was just blew me away. It was really good. The food was really good. The atmosphere was nice. I'm sure it wasn't perfect, and then after that day, it was like I couldn't trust Google reviews. And I've had many experiences like that throughout the internet, and I think pretty much everybody's had some degree of experience like that with reviews. And I think this is why you get the trend of people going to social media, for example, their group of friends, and rather than searching, in Google or whatever, they'll just put a post up and ask their friends some question that they want insight on. And sometimes you just want, the inside of your friends, and I honestly, but I think sometimes it is this shortcut to try to get around the gaming that goes on. Whether it's somebody trying to sabotage a place, or somebody trying to overly pump a place. But then there's another issue too that I was trying to get to earlier with a restaurant. Like, there might be some aspect of a restaurant, like maybe an item menu or a one particular aspect that on its own kind of ruins the experience. but maybe the rest of it's fine. Maybe the rest of it's excellent. So like, how do you parse that apart in a freaking Google Maps review? You really can't. And so what I think is needed is some kind of overarching way of annotating individual components. Think about this for a second. You post something on social media, and oftentimes a post will go with a link, for example, and or you'll give a comment on some post or whatever, and then you'll get upvotes, thumbs up, whatever emoji response on the reactions. And like, you always kind of wonder if it's a post and there's a link, like, are they upvoting my comment about the post, or are they upvoting the post itself? What aspect of the post are they voting up? And the laugh emoji is an excellent example of this. There's so much like, and oftentimes it's very obvious in the context, if they're laughing at you or they're laughing because they think something's funny. But this big problem with the internet is all this term overriding, the fact that so many things can be taken in so many different ways. And there needs to be some way to differentiate this. And I think getting this granularity, getting some annotation medium that's very granular, to the extreme. For example, you get some of this when you've got live streaming, right? Because the reactions, float up when they're sent kind of in real time. And so you can get kind of a time-stamped capture. And I think that's really powerful. Or where you can see where people in a video have, rewound and rewatched something. You can try and extract some meaning from that. But I think there's a lot more that can be done, because here's another example of what you could do. If you could selectively annotate things, but not just selectively annotate things, but retain the sovereignty over the annotations. So like, say, like I've got this, I have a notepad, and just anytime I find something that I want to keep track of, I can't, I don't have the means to just like download every video and store it on a personal hard drive, which would be the ideal, because then you know that you couldn't lose it because you have it. But outside of that, I just grab links, and I just drop links into this notebook, and then I'll sometimes put little notes by it, something that hopefully I can remind myself on. I've tried to use other things. There's a nice thing called org mode. If you've used Emacs, if you're a programmer or into things like that, that has a lot of nice utilities around them. But it is since I know that the notes like always available, and it doesn't require any, especially for like mobile input. I can pretty easily drop a link and type in a few letters as a note, and then I just keep them sequentially, and that kind of acts as my time, not really timestamp, but that's what would be nice, is if you had this control over what you were thinking, how you were consuming the world, how you're watching things, things you'd seen in real life or heard. And then as you go through the internet, as we consume different things, whether on our phones or on our laptops or tablets, or even, with our own personal devices, if you could ensure that, one, you completely owned every one of those pieces of information, like you had sovereignty on deciding like who you would allow to like consume that, and for what purposes. Then also, not just that, but then you could also be able to have this ability to like kind of analyze things about your life without this fear of like just giving everything to some major tech giant. That's good. For example, one of my biggest inhibitions around like health tracking is the massive invasion of privacy, it feels like. Even with the assurances, I was just listening to I believe it was a congressional inquiry on, I think it was Google on Android and stuff, but it was talking about how you turned off location tracking, and you were still getting location tracked. And they justify it, right? They justify it because they say, well, in order to have the cell phone work, we have to know where the cell phone's at. for a lot of these utilities. You have to, and maybe true, but well, why do you say you can turn off location services if you can't turn off location services? It's this, but I think if you had this means where it could be very clear of this thing is something that I recorded, it's an observation I made, and I want to be the one to decide how that will be utilized. And maybe, I think this is kind of the big thing, maybe it would cost more to have that kind of service, but I think a lot of people would be, wanting to opt into something like that if they could ensure that they were going to have this greater leverage over the data that they were producing and providing. For example, you think about how much of the big tech's power comes from this kind of incumbency that they have, this moat that they've built with all the interactions they've had with you, all the things that you do, all the data that you've supplied them. It creates this massive bulwark. That's one of the reasons, for example, I'm a big bull on Tesla, because they've got cameras everywhere on all these cars that are driving all over the world. And so they've probably consumed, more data about the physical world and mobilizing oneself in it than any other company. And so even if they were to lose everything except for that, or even some models trained on that, if they lost the bulk of even the data they've had, if you just have those models that have been trained on that data, that's a lot of power, that's a lot of leverage. And so I think what needs to happen is we need some kind of able to get to this granularity to where we're not these digital serfs, right? So and a lot of that, I believe, is focused on this thing, the granularity of how we can create, annotate, connect things on the internet and data-wise in our lives. And I find it's one of the most promising aspects of this is that it would bring an enormous utility. Like if I could just do this for my own personal data, even if I never shared it with anybody else, then I have all sorts of ideas of things I could do. I mean, you could detect patterns and maybe you've got some health condition and because you've been able to more meticulously annotate, whether it's yourself directly, you're manually putting in, notes about things in your life, and you're storing that in a notebook equivalency, or you just, you trust enough the digital apparatuses around you or in your house, in your smart home, whatever, that you can freely and openly collect this stuff because that it's not just going to be turned against you to design ad campaigns or even more nefarious stuff. And so you freely and unconsciously contribute a lot to this, and then patterns can be deciphered, whether it's by yourself or if you apply it to some AI model that can detect things. But so again, I think there's tons of power, and think about it this way. Okay, have you ever been in a discussion, conversation, and you get moderated out of it somehow? Either you're downvoted, so your comment's less likely to appear, or there's shadow banning or actual banning, or I think during the past few years with everything that happened internationally, governmentally, pathologically, there's just this really intense need for us to be able to not depend on having to go through the kind of cookie cutter solutions that are given to us. And the way you get around a cookie cutter is you have a knife. You have something precise. You can do an X-Acto knife, right, or a plotter, a cry-cut machine. Well, whatever you have, the 3D printer. These are all excellent examples of when the more granularity you can get on something, the more leverage you have. And so that is what we need. We need a new internet that is built around granularity and this kind of atomized approach to our data. And I think what would be awesome is imagine a bucket full of all the granularized points that you could possibly think that you'd want to conserve about your life. So whether it's things you watch and like, things that stand out to you, some thing you're reading in a book, maybe even in a physical book, so just random thoughts you've had or observations you make during the day. Imagine if you take all that and have it in data, have it in a data format, and then be able to like filter against that and search it, and then imagine if you've been able to annotate all these things yourself, and then you have some friend or some person, acquaintance you make that's had a very similar experience to you. Maybe you share a chronic disease, or maybe you just got a shared hobby, and you could take all of those insights that you have kind of, and you've collected them freely because you know that you're not just throwing them to the winds, to the tech gods, and they can decide, what stuff of yours they're going to keep and what format they'll let you have it back, how easy it is for you to search. But if you had this stuff and you could kind of just conjure up out of this bucket all the data points related to what you wanted, and then you could say, like, this particular person, I want them to have access to this subset of my data because I like this person, like, we get along well, or maybe it's a family member, right? I want them to be able to have reign over this segment. And likewise, they're going the other way. So if you could say, this particular person, when they're talking about this particular thing, I really trust the things that they do, that they've produced. So in my searches, in my inquiries, I want to like place a special price or a premium on, I want to boost this particular signal from this person. And think about the power that could give you, especially as you kind of collectively get together in a group, whether it's, it could be a professional work group, it could be some sports team, it could be there's all sorts of different possibilities that could open up if people had this massive leverage over their data. And I don't think it is as hard to get. And I think even with AI now, it's becoming more of a possibility to have this stuff, because you'd have this. Imagine if you had an LLM that you knew was your own, basically that you could train just on your data. Then you could query against, it could make it far easier to remember things that you want to remember, to decipher patterns. And if you didn't want to, if you completely didn't want to trust, all the AI stuff, if we had this common way of ingesting and filtering and getting back, and you could feel assured that you were always going to have this sovereignty over it. Like, I could see all sorts of ways in which I would go full bore into, utilizing, because I think we look at like the power of like Wikipedia, and early on there are so many tech companies that just like got so excited because, you've got all these people that are working free that are, providing this grand service. And I mean, I know that people in Wikipedia probably had their own, motives and stuff, but it was powerful. And then you see all of these completely failed and botched attempts at crowdsourcing, and so they've gone the surreptitious route. Tech companies have just any way and every way they can, they will get you to sign away. You've got to accept the terms, conditions. You've got to do whatever so that we have all the data. We have all the data. We own you as far as your information. And in that way, they continue their dominance, and they can be as completely nonchalant in there. And what's the word I'm thinking of? It can be completely indiscreet. It's like the Dilbert cartoon when the sales rep knows that the people have to spend their budget, and so he just does all sorts of crazy and absurd things because he knows that they're going to have to spend the money with him anyway. So he doesn't care, and that's very much the way I feel tech sees us and treats us. Is they know that we're essentially in a digital fiefdom, and that they are the great lords or samurais, the great knights that they can tell us little plebes where to go, and we can't do much about it. At least that's what they want us to think. And in many ways, they're kind of right. There are options to leave it, but to leave the system is you have to depend on a lot of open source stuff that's not very refined, that's hard to do. There are some very good people on, trying to make it easier, but it's very hard because there's just so much in the way of, there's just not enough profit impulse behind those routes, and so it becomes very difficult. Anyway, so again, granularity for data is, I believe, key, and the ability to not just have these minimal sized data bytes, but also to have sovereignty, to have autonomy and leverage over them. And that is the big key, I believe, because then you will unleash this massive pent up I just think about this. This is what I think about every time I go to a grocery store and see a bunch of people stocking stuff on shelves. I think about all of these people, I don't know these people. I don't know, what hobbies they have. I don't know their IQs. I don't know what they're listening to when I walk by oftentimes because, they've got headphones in. But I can't help shake the idea that we're squandering so much power. People with hobbies, anybody with a hobby or with, something that they're just obsessed with, they can have so much power and so much potential, and it's kind of just trapped there, right? Because now we have the internet, and if you can find some outlet, if you find if your YouTube channel or an Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and you're able to unleash some of that and expose a small portion of that to the world. But there are so many things where that's harder to do. And so you have to wait for these happenstance things, and then you have to hope that there's an audience that's big enough so that the average monetizing models work for you. But if everything could be kind of atomized and selected that way, and people felt the control, so that they would not feel any inhibitions to sharing that, because they would trust that what they were collecting, at the end of the day, they kind of could direct to whom they were going to open it up, and who they wanted to try to put up barriers to getting it. Obviously, if anybody really wants certain information and they're persistent and they have enough resources, it's very likely that they're going to get to it. But it would be nice if you weren't just having to freely give away stuff, as I feel like I do every time I'm using my phone. I'm just, they have me. I'm a mark for whether it's Google or Facebook or whoever. And so that wraps up today's summary of, again, granularization and sovereignty.